This is the Place Monument, dedicated July 24, 1947. It commemorates the arrival of the Mormon pioneers into the valley of the Great Salt Lake 100 years before, and also the role of others, Spanish Catholic fathers, trappers and fur traders, official government explorers, and California immigrants who contributed to the successful funding of an empire in the top of the mountains. Driven from their homes in Missouri and Illinois because of political and religious prejudice, the Mormons began their historic 1,500-mile trek from Nauvoo to the Rocky Mountains, an event that had been prophesied by the prophet Joseph Smith 4 years earlier. As early as September 9, 1845, leaders of the church had determined to fund their Zion in the valley of the Great Salt Lake. Because of the intense cold and deadly scourge of cholera, the 400-mile trek across Iowa in 1846 was the most trying of the entire exodus. These handicaps, together with the furnishing of 500 volunteers, the Mormon Battalion, to fight in the war against Mexico, forced the Saints to halt temporarily in the Missouri River. Winter quarters was established on the present site of Florence, Nebraska. From this place, on April 7, 1847, the Pioneer Company left for the Rocky Mountains. The train consisted of 143 men, 3 women, 2 children, 72 wagons, 93 horses, 66 oxen, 52 mules, 19 cows, and 17 dogs. 17 additional members of the Crow and Thurkill families, with 3 wagons, who had wintered at the site of modern-day Pueblo, Colorado, were added at Fort Laramie, and 6 members of the Mormon Battalion joined them at the crossing of the Green River, making in all a total of 171 souls who came into the Great Salt Lake Valley from July 22nd to the 24th, 1847. Fort Laramie was reached on June 1st, South Pass on June 27th, and Fort Bridger on July 7th. On July 13, Orson Pratt was directed to take 23 wagons and 42 men and proceed ahead to determine where the Reed-Donner Trail crossed the mountains. 2 days later, Orson Pratt's company discovered the trail, which ran southwest for 15 miles from the present site of Hennifer, Utah, and then turned west over the mountains. Following this route, Orson Pratt and John Brown ascended Big Mountain, and from its summit on July 19, saw for the first time the Great Salt Lake. 2 days later, Orson Pratt and Erastus Snow proceeded from the foot of Little Mountain. 4 1/2 miles down Immigration Canyon, ascended a hill near the entrance of the valley, and in the words of Orson Pratt, quote, "beheld in a moment such an extensive scenery before us that we could not refrain from a shout of joy which almost involuntarily escaped from our lips the moment this glad and lovely scenery was within our view. Although we had only 1 horse between us, we traversed a circuit of about 12 miles. End of quote. On the morning of July 22nd, a party of 9 horsemen, headed by Orson Pratt and George A. Smith, rode into the valley for the purpose of locating a place to plant crops. On the same day, Willard Richards led a train of 60 wagons into the valley. Temporary encampment was made 7 1/2 miles southwest from the mouth of the canyon. Early next morning, permanent encampment was made 2 miles north on the banks of the South Fork of City Creek. On the same day, the waters of City Creek were turned upon the hard-baked soil, thus inaugurating the system of modern scientific irrigation in America. Meanwhile, Brigham Young, who had been seriously ill with mountain fever, entered the valley on July 24th with the remaining 15 wagons. Of this historic occasion, Wilford Woodruff, in whose carriage President Young rode, says, quote, "When we came out of the canyon in full view of the valley, I turned the side of my carriage around, open to the west, and President Young arose from his bed and took a survey of the country. While gazing on the scene, he was enwrapped in vision for several minutes. When this vision had passed, he said, quote, 'This is the right place. Drive on.'" Duty calls. With God for their friends. President Brigham Young. The position of a Mormon battalion volunteer was one of shared allegiance. He showed his loyalty as a United States citizen in a historically pivotal military endeavor. At the same time, he supported a mutually beneficial arrangement between his church and his nation. The battalion soldiers' uniform allowance of $42 each, plus much of their pay, went to the Mormon exodus from the Missouri River to their destination in the valley of the Great Salt Lake, and to help gather those exiled church members that were too poor to make the journey from Nauvoo, Illinois. Moreover, the battalion march, in effect, moved more than 500 of the Latter-day Saints west at government expense. Faith as a gale wind going west. Not all of the Mormons who went west in 1846 and 47 traveled overland. Beginning on February 4th, 1846, in New York Harbor, 70 men, 68 women, and 100 children boarded the ship Brooklyn and made a 6-month, 24,000-mile journey around Cape Horn, landing at present-day San Francisco. Mormon battalion members made their way up the coast and joined with the Brooklyn Saints. Some of them were present at Sutter's Mill in January 1848, when gold was discovered, sparking the famous gold rush. By summer, a few left to join the Saints in the Salt Lake Valley. Along the way, they blazed the Mormon Carson Trail across the Sierra Nevada, a major travel route used by 49ers coming to California. One of the longest infantry marches in U.S. history. In 1846, camped mainly on the shores of the Missouri River, Mormons were already exiled from the United States and bound for refuge in the West. Then a call to arms came from the U.S. government to serve in the Mexican War. U.S. President James K. Polk needed 500 enlistees. The call was politely received, but with suspicion and resentment, recalling earlier rebuffs when seeking redress for persecutions in Missouri. Brigham Young saw an opportunity to demonstrate loyalty to the United States and secure monies from the government. On July 15th, gathering at present-day Council Bluffs, Iowa, 513 soldiers left with 33 women and 42 children for Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. On August 12th, upon being outfitted, they continued a 2,030-mile march to the California coast, with intense suffering from the lack of adequate food, water, and raiment. They constructed the first wagon road from Santa Fe to the Pacific Ocean and opened the entire Southwest for settlement. Having endured their march for over 6 months, they reached Mission San Diego on January 29, 1847. duty triumphs. These men have crossed a continent. General Stephen W. Kearny. With the conquest of Mexico accomplished before the arrival of the battalion, the soldiers never engaged in combat. Rather, the battalion's role was to strengthen and stabilize the U.S. presence in California and facilitate the settlement of the West through the construction of roads, schools, digging of wells, and firing the first brick for a courthouse in San Diego. Discharged battalion men working for John Sutter discovered gold in California, leading to the 1849 gold rush. Returning to the Salt Lake Valley, cutting through rock in the Sierra Nevada, they opened the first wagon road east. This trail brought over 200,000 gold seekers to California. Between 1856 and 1860, some 3,000 members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints eagerly started their westward journey to Zion by handcart. The pioneers who departed from Iowa City walked approximately 1,300 miles, and those who departed from Florence, Nebraska, they walked almost as far. Each rough-hewn handcart carried around 300 pounds of their earthly possessions and provisions for their long journey. Usually 5 people were assigned to each handcart. Hardships and trials tested the faith of the men, women, and children as they pushed and pulled their handcarts over rugged trails, mountains, rivers, deserts, plains, through heavy snow, drenching rain, and fatiguing heat. The pioneers' love for God and His Son, Jesus Christ, inspired them to take every footstep with faith. Their hope was to gather with the early settlers in Zion, where they would have religious freedom, live in peace, and help build the kingdom of God. Upon arriving in the valley of the Great Salt Lake, these noble pioneers, they were joyful and thankful that they had reached the end of their arduous journey. Altogether, the total number of people that comprised the 10 handcart companies was 2,962. The total number of handcarts was 653. The total number of wagons was 50, and the total number of deaths en route was about 250.